Hey, everybody, welcome to my guest tonight. I'm Jeff Revilla. I've got a great guest joining me tonight, Leanne Linsky of Plauzzable. We're talking comedy, virtual comedy.
She left the boardroom, took the mic. Now she's killing punchlines every night. From New York to her LA shows, she's bringing laughs wherever she goes. Zooming in with a comic plan. She built a stage in virtual land. No cover charge, no drink minimum. Just laughs on tap. Oh, here she comes. It's Leanne Linsky, comedy's tech queen, on my guest tonight with Revilla NC.
Yeah, that's amazing.
One of my favorite parts of the show is creating the theme songs for my guests. And I've given every guest the choice if they wanted to hear it before or live in the moment. And Leanne's the first one to choose live in the moment. So I love seeing you backstage. Everyone starts dancing and swaying a little bit. What was your first impression of hearing the song live?
I was like, hey, that's pretty good. And it's accurate.
Well, I do a lot of research on my guests. I got about 10 pages on you here that we'll be getting into. And you have quite an amazing journey to where you got. And there's some parallels between what I've been working on and what you're working on. I think we're going to have some crossover towards the end where we're both really supporting these independent artists, independent creators. And I think there's going to be something that comes out of this. I think it's going to be very good for everybody listening, especially if you're an independent creator. So stay tuned to the end and see what the heck's going on here. But we definitely want to focus on Leanne's story. And you came out of Illinois. I think you started school there. And is that where you kind of found comedy, back in Illinois?
Yeah, no, so in a sense, because my family's really funny, so it was a kind of requirement to get by. So I guess that's where I first learned to have a sense of humor is my parents and my brothers. They're all very quick-witted, very funny. And that was kind of like our family's default is, having the ability to tell jokes and comedic timing. So I kind of grew up in a household of that. So that's where I was really first introduced to it. And my parents were also very encouraging of me public speaking, honing those skills. So anytime I had a presentation or something to do in class, they always were like, practice. Get up, do it a few times in front of us. And so from a very young age, I learned the importance of practicing a presentation because that ultimately reduced any stage fright or any nervousness that I might have. So I kind of grew up feeling very comfortable doing those things.
Did you come home from school and have like little skits ready to try out in front of the family at dinner time? Or?
Oh, I was always doing some sort of performing, I guess, when I think about it. Even when I was really little, my mom used to babysit another girl and she'd come over and she probably hated it because I'd be like, we're doing a show. And I put up a shower curtain between the furnace and the storage cabinets in the basement. And then we'd go through the whole neighborhood and knock on doors and have all the other kids invited and they'd have to come down and watch us come out in my mother's clothes to old records. I didn't know quite what I was going to be performing, but I knew I was on stage and they had all come to see me.
Did you initially lean more towards improv or towards comedy, back in those early years?
When I first started doing comedy, it was, that's an interesting question. So I first took a comedy writing class so that I could write monologues like Johnny Carson style because I was doing public speaking for work. So I took my first comedy writing in 2001. And then shortly thereafter, I learned that the Second City opened a training center in Las Vegas because that's where I was living. I went to UNLV for my junior and senior year of college. What a great place to go to school in your 20s, right? So I was in Vegas and then got a job and stayed. So the people I worked with were like, hey, Second City's here. And I was like, what? And then I ended up taking all their classes and multiple classes. So that's how I got into improv. So it started out, I just wanted to like really be funny during my public speaking for work. And then I took an improv class and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. And I'm going to do this forever. Yeah.
And did that lead into that first time getting up on stage and trying out material solo? Or how did you get to falling in love with comedy or what was your first comedy experience?
I think my first comedy experience was trying to do that Johnny Carson style monologue in front of everybody I worked with. So a few hundred people. And then like, it wasn't good. Like I was like, I need to work on my joke writing. So although like when I spoke and everything in general, when I would do any public speaking, I could be funny in the moment and things like that. But joke writing is a very special skill. So I guess I could say I bombed that first time. But when I first did, I think my first class show for improv was in a coffee shop across from UNLV, which I had since graduated long before, but it was in this coffee shop across from the university, and it was packed because when you first do improv, like all your friends are excited, like, oh, you're doing comedy? I'm going to come see you. And it's usually not good. But I just remember that some random man, he wasn't part of any one group, but I don't know what was going on with him specifically, but he kind of stood in front of the stage right as we were starting our show and was like, ah, and like disrupted the whole coffee shop. And they had to like escort him out. And then we started. So that's kind of how my first show went.
Do you remember whenever you did that performance in front of your coworkers? You said a couple hundred people, you're delivering a speech, and you said it wasn't your best performance ever. You got through the presentation, but even though you didn't get like maybe those rush of laughs that you thought for your first time, did you walk off that stage like feeling pumped or just like that was incredible?
Yeah. So typically when I would do my present in front of work and everything, I kind of had a different way of going about it. Like if I were talking on a specific topic, I somehow knew how to make it funny, but I wasn't joke writing. And even in school, I got a lot of feedback. In fact, in college, my advisor, just to give you an example, I was in an international marketing class, and my advisor happened to be the professor for that. And we each had to do a presentation on the G7 meetings at the time. And so each pairing of us, we broke off into pairs to do these things. And everybody had a different country that was part of it, and you represented that country. And so ours was German. So there was like these other countries, and somehow it was like the 2 or 3 people that went ahead of us, they knew how to speak something in the language from their country. And that's how they started their presentation. So I looked at my partner, his name was Chris, and he was like, I go, do you know how to speak German? He's like, no. And I was like, all right, I got this. And so I was like, good gay evening, pig Latin. We don't know German. So my teacher basically threw up his hands and put his head down on his desk, and everybody busted up laughing because it was so serious. And I never spoke in that class, as a student. And then all of a sudden this was our first presentation. And he was just like, after that, he's like, I would go to him and be like, I got to get a job after I graduate. And he's like, I really think you need to go into entertainment. So he started introducing me to people in the entertainment industry in Las Vegas. Oh, wow. and I tried helping my friend's band. I wanted to manage their band, and I was doing all this stuff, marketing for them. So that's kind of like, in general, when I would get up and public speak, I did pretty well, like especially in class, I would get really good high marks for it. And I would always have a comment like, great use of humor. But when I did that initial monologue where I actually tried to write jokes, it was terrible. And I knew it wasn't good. I'm like, this isn't going well. Like, this isn't my norm. And I realized like writing jokes and that like to deliver them in such a way of like a comedian would was much different than the way I was doing it. And I was like, I got to get, I didn't feel bad. I was like, what happened? Like, how is that different? And I wanted to know, like, how do I get better? How do I work that out? How do I improve that? And that was kind of my thing. I was kind of bummed. I was like, interesting. Yeah.
And you hear that from comedians a lot, that, sometimes your jokes land on your first appearance and you get laughs and you're like, oh my God, it's so easy. I could just do this all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have it where it's a struggle, but the art in that struggle is, how do I get this better and better? And I think what's important about your backstory is you came from the family who was, performing at dinner time and in the evening and doing skits. And then you found the UCB and you're doing these things that translate into your work life. You're making work more fun by performing. And, now you're getting up on stage and doing comedy, but you realize that the repetition is important.
Yeah.
The getting, doing it over and over and over and trying things is what is really fun about performing, is how do I make this idea work? And you didn't find it perfectly in that coffee shop, but I think you really started to really like that process of, here's how you get from point A to point B, but something disconnected. It wasn't just like performing at my office where in the moment I can make a joke. I have this scripted thing that I'm trying to work in it.
Yeah, the scripted thing in front of my coworkers, they were like, what? And then the thing with the coffee shop, I don't even remember how our actual show was, but I think the most interesting thing about that was the man who distracted everybody. I couldn't tell you how I did.
You're like, how am I supposed to follow this?
Right. But the other thing that I remember too, growing up, that I think is, like I said, my parents really instilled in me, like, you have to practice. You're not going to just be good. You have to practice at anything. And so two things come to mind is, one, my dad, he was a telephone repairman for his whole career for 30 years. And the guys would get together every year and they would have a dinner, like with their wives, and they'd all go out and they'd fund it themselves and everything and do it. And they started calling them, I don't know, the no shit dinners, because my dad would get up and tell jokes and he'd be like, no, this one's no shit. Like, that's what it's. So, but he started, so they asked him to MC it every year. And so he would spend, I don't know, 4 to 6 months finding jokes. Like he didn't yet. So like he'd like try to research, like, what kind of jokes can I put together, and like spending time and reading in the library and stuff, and then trying to come up with jokes for each person in attendance. So he did a roast of everybody there, and it was really popular. So he spent a lot of time like researching jokes and how to write a joke about each person. And so I saw him do it, and I'm like, yeah, it's a lot harder than one would think. So that kind of made me. And then the other thing is my mom was a fan of Dear Abby.
Well,
and so she wrote to Dear Abby several times, I think, as she raised us children. I don't know if you remember Dear Abby.
That was the only way to get answers. You couldn't Google it.
Yeah, but she actually sat down to have me, because I used to worry a lot when I was a kid. Nothing much has changed, but she, I guess, worried I was always trying to like be perfect, get good grades, do all these good things. And so she found an article from Dear Abby, and I still have it, I think, a news clipping, and she gave it to me, and it's about being the best little shrub that you can. Not everybody has to be a tall tree, because the shrubs serve their purpose and everything. And so, but it has about like how you go about doing that, and that you have to put in the work even to be a good shrub and like do it. I don't know why that came up in this conversation, and we're talking about Dear Abby and news clippings, but those things play into, I guess, my work ethic in comedy, if you will.
Yeah. And so from Vegas, I think it was around a couple years later, you moved to New York. And
yes.
New York, you start finding open mics, and then I think you move up into hosting some evenings. Tell us a little bit about your New York journey.
Yeah, I lost my job. So I was laid off from, full disclosure. I had a job of nearly 13 years in Vegas after I'd graduated. And I worked for a big corporation, and I loved it. And when I started doing comedy, I also loved comedy. And my friends, then I'd take vacations and I'd go to New York for a few weeks and study improv. And I'd drive to LA every weekend and study improv. And my friends, I had said to them, they're like, oh, are you going to move to LA or New York? And I'm like, well, I'll move to New York, but I can't, because I have this job that I love and a home and these things. Well, eventually, fast forward, all of a sudden I'm out of a job. My friends were like, hey, didn't you say? And I was like, why did you listen to me? So I had a phone call that said, hey, I moved, one of my friends, hey, got a sublet in New York. Do you want to go in on it with me? And I was like, I have to think about it. He goes, you have 1 hour.
Peer pressure.
Right. So I was like, I called him back a short time, within that hour. And I was like, hey, yeah, I'm in. And then picked up 2 suitcases and I moved to New York with just a couple of suitcases and and no idea. And I was like, I'm here. So to your point of like, how did I get into open mics? I got real involved in taking classes at the Magnet Theater and at UCB, which is Upright Citizens Brigade, and got really involved in the improv scene. And then I actually went back to Chicago that summer and took a class at IO Chicago for 5 weeks, like their summer intensive where you go through levels 1 through 5. Went back to New York. And then sometime in that first year, a friend of mine, we were like, I was trying to write a lot of sketch comedy. And I was like, how do you know if it's good unless you get people together and do a table read or you put it up on its feet and just kind of work through it? So he and I started an open mic for sketch comedy called Casual Sketch. And then we did that as like a monthly open mic, and people could come in and bring and cast their sketch and then do that. And then after a few months, he was like, not really interested anymore. I'm like, oh, I'm going to keep going. And over the years, I did it for 7.5 years. And over the years, it evolved from sketch comedy to monologues to stand-up. And then we sometimes had these random magicians who would come in and do stuff. They're like, can we do magic? I'm like, as long as it's funny. So I had like this wild journey of this open mic that evolved. And I wasn't going to stand-up open mics, but I just started hosting my own. And and then eventually I started going to other open mics and things like that, because eventually I started doing stand-up, but I didn't start out doing stand-up. I was doing improv. I was doing sketch comedy. I was doing some theater. Yeah. And then when I wrote my one-woman show, I incorporated stand-up into the one-woman show.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the one-woman show. It looks like it ran in 3 different cities.
Yeah, I started it so I took about a year to write it. And I would write like every day from, I treated it like a job, like from 9 a.m. until lunch, I'd be writing. And then in the afternoons after lunch, I would work on marketing or submitting to festivals or rehearsing or classes or performing in other shows and whatever I was doing. And then when I did that, it was called Lady Luck is a Whore. What happens in Vegas stays. Everything, or what happened in the show, everything that happens in the show stays in the show. Is I think my tagline. So to kind of a play on that. So I did that show and I premiered it at the People's Improv Theater, also known as the Pit in New York City. And then I got a run. So they gave me a run of shows. And I did that. And when I first premiered it, it was like a 25 to 27 minute show because you would share an hour slot with somebody else. And so I did that. And then while I was doing that run and through the next few months, I continued writing my show because I wanted to get into Cap Fringe, which was in Washington, D.C. And for that, I needed 50 minutes. And I hadn't written it yet. So I was frantically writing. And yeah, I submitted. I got accepted into Cap Fringe. And when I got there, I had a run of shows and it was 50 minutes. And then from there, I was accepted into Fringe Wilmington in Wilmington, Delaware. So I went to Delaware and did a run of shows. And then I got accepted into United Solo Festival back in New York City. So I went back and that was in Theater Row. And so I went back to New York and did the United Solo Fest. And so I was performing that show for probably a year or so. Yeah.
Wow. And the thing that I love about your story is, you're trying new things, right? You're pushing the limits. Comedy's always like, I can make people laugh like this, but I want to try to make them laugh like this. And you go to New York, you're doing these open mics, you're hosting, and you're kind of pushing the limits of, what is an open mic night? You're doing improv and sketches and the magicians always show up. I'll have a magician story for you later, but they must be the most underserved market in the world. But
Yes.
Magicians show up all the time. But in 2019, you start pushing this boundary further of where can I perform, or maybe what is a performing space, and you start dabbling in like these online shows. What was kind of the thing that pushed you into trying to experiment? Because that's before COVID. You're doing these things prior to COVID. So how did you get there in 2019?
So what happened was in the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, I moved from New York to California. I would say LA, but it was Long Beach. And if you know LA area, Long Beach isn't as close as it looks on the map. And also my friends lied. So,
We're by LA.
also anything over like 2 miles is an hour at least drive in California is silly. And so what happened was is here I land in LA and I am driving into the city to get spots on open mics, and I'd show up and it's a different vibe than in New York, you know? It wasn't what I was accustomed to. And a lot of bringer shows, if you're familiar with bringer shows, where you're required to bring X number of paying people in order to get like 3 minutes of stage time. Hard to do when you don't know anybody in the city, you know, like who am I bringing? So I would go to these open mics and everything, and I was spending like ridiculous amounts of time on the highway, and I was driving a Buick, which is just like sucking gas and money out of my wallet, you know. Also, it was great because Buick, I have to give them credit. Like it's like driving a, you know, like no one's going to hurt me. I was rear-ended on the 405, which I now have severe anxiety from, but you know, I was in a Buick, I was safe. So anyway, I was like, how can I don't want to spend all my time driving. I don't like it. I'm used to being on a subway where I can multitask. And also I really missed the camaraderie and the community that I knew in New York. It just, you know, I'm like, how do I hang on to that? That was that meaningful to me. And what do I do? Skype, you know, Zoom. And I was using Zoom way back in 2014, 2015 for work. I had a day job, and I'm like, maybe I'll do that. And then I was like, Skype, you know, most people, when I mentioned Zoom, people didn't know what it was. And then so then I started producing shows in Long Beach. I started podcasting. I started doing all these other things. So I kind of put it off to the side. Life happened. And then fast forward to August 2019, I'm like, you know what? I've had this idea for so long. It's just an itch I have to scratch. I have to do some things online. So I'm like, I'm just going to use Zoom. I had a WordPress site for a business I had for coaching. I created a whole sign up thing, cobbled it all together, invited people. And then people were coming and paying for this online open mic. And then other people were like, online, why would I do that? And then COVID happened. And then everybody's online. And I was like, oh, now everybody's doing what I'm already doing. Great. Because I think those technologies serve a purpose and got us through a really terrible time. But also, for as great as they weren't designed for online performance. And as a comedian, having real, you know, a response without a delay and having, you know, I don't want to feel like I just got off a work call with Bob from accounting. No offense to Bob or accounting, but it doesn't. How many hours can you spend on one particular platform without losing your mind? So I thought, if I solve the problem of bringing things online, and now clearly it works, other people are doing it throughout a pandemic, how do I solve the other nuances and other challenges we have as, you know, comedians? And so I started putting my thoughts together, and I ended up going back to school for my master's in innovation and entrepreneurship. And I thought, if I want to go and create something, I have to surround myself, just like I did by moving to New York and just jump in the ecosystem of comedy. I have to jump into the business startup ecosystem and find developers and people who can actually bring my vision to life. And so that's kind of how I got to where I was making Plauzzable.
Yeah, plauzzable.com. I'll have the spelling in the show notes, a direct link in the show notes. Tell us a little bit. So you go back to school. Yeah, I think did you get accepted into like an incubator kind of program?
Yeah, I did. After I graduated, I got accepted into an incubator program, and then from there an accelerator, and then a few other accelerators and founders programs, which are very helpful. They're kind of like these, if for people who aren't familiar with accelerators or incubators kind of like was where you have an idea and you want to hatch the plan, you know, a very early stage startup. And then an accelerator is where you're building, or you have an a minimum viable product and you want to grow more rapidly or get funding and things like that. So these programs are also really key because they offered a lot of workshops and a lot of opportunities to grow the network and to meet people I might not otherwise meet because I was running with a comedy crowd, which is not the same as a business crowd. So, much different things. And then kind of like diving back into my undergrad was also in business and taking all of the odd jobs in my corporate positions and everything that I had learned over those years. And I'm like, oh, now I see why it's so valuable. And so putting it all together. Yeah.
And when you started piecing it together, this is an idea you had many, many years in the making. You start to get this rough draft, the MVP that, what's the minimum I can take to market? What were some of the key components? What were some of the must-haves that Plauzzable had to have for you to deliver on that dream of you can do comedy virtually? You can have an experience in your computer, on your laptop, and it's still going to be fun and entertaining.
Well, I kind of believe that could be possible before I even tried it. When I thought of it, I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't we do that? Like, there's just bridge that gap, connect East Coast to West Coast. And then when I started having this idea more, I was like, well, I'm going to test it just using the things I already use for other things and see what happens. And when I ended up, people found me through Google searches before COVID to sign up for my open mic online. And were finding me through, just random without me doing any marketing. I was like, okay, this is something, and it was especially great. And I was like, it also mattered because new people, it might be too scary to go to an in-person club, but it reduces that level of fear to just log in online. So there was also that element. But the other really cool thing is like we had people from all over the world who would tap in, which was really cool. So people I knew from, California, also New York, and then all of a sudden some new people hopping in from very rural areas in the US and outside of our country was mind blowing. I'm like, okay, this tells me I'm onto something. That was kind of where I knew.
And something that's really unique about your business model that really has that DIY mentality that, you mentioned a lot of newcomers. This was a place for people to try it out. Maybe you don't want to go to the club and try to run 7 minutes in front of strangers or, your structure allows people to just try it out. Like if you wanted to just have a show with a couple of friends, you can do that on Plauzzable. If you want to have a show with 10 or 20 people and sell tickets, you can do that. And the tech stack of Plauzzable handles both kinds of shows. Tell us a little bit about, what can as a creator who wants to come to your platform and do a show, what are my options for producing a night out?
Yeah, great question. So first I'll say this is I wanted to level the playing field and there's no gatekeepers, there's no algorithms, there's no major hoops you have to jump through other than creating your account, which if you're a fan, it's your first, last name, email, and password. If you're a comedian, then you would enter first, last name, password, email, and then you can fill out your profile because your profile is public facing like a LinkedIn profile, an example, or your Facebook profile. It kind of tells about you so that you would show up in, you're logged in on the first page there. So you would be able to log in. Once you create your profile and your account, then you have access to the scheduling tools, the ticketing services, the virtual stage, everything you need to host an online comedy event, whether it is you can pick from an open mic, a show, a podcast, tech rehearsal. People should have tech rehearsals. I highly encourage that, especially if it's your first time on any new technology. Don't just show up and think you don't, probably, maybe. And then what is the other one? Oh, a class. We have classes and workshops. So you can kind of pick. And so when you schedule an event, it'll walk you through tell us about the event. What time is the event? Is it a recurring event? All those things. Do you want to charge for this event? and then it will show up in the event listings. So fans, when they log in, they can go peruse the listings of all of the comedy events on Plauzzable. And Plauzzable is designed, you don't have to cobble together any technologies. So think of Zoom or Google Meets or something, and then you have an Eventbrite, and then you have your own website, and then you have, some, who knows what else you're cobbling together. You just log into Plauzzable. We offer the video streaming service. So when you log it, like, you don't have to download anything. You just join a show and it's on your screen. It's all cloud-based, and you can see and hear each other just like you would, like you and I, Jeff, are seeing and hearing each other on here, except that our screen is designed specifically for comedy. So it doesn't look and feel like you're in another platform or a work event or anything like that. You can bring multiple people to and from the stage. So if you're hosting a podcast with a couple comedy guests, you can bring them to the stage and they have focus. The audience is on either side. So the audience can see and hear each other. You can see and hear them. There's a number of different things. So yeah, we have the talent directory, the event directories, everything that you need all in one place. So you don't have to figure out all the tech all the time.
Yeah, you're not having a subscription to Zoom or StreamYard. You're not having a monthly, however Eventbrite or Eventbrite pricing works nowadays. Nobody knows, but sometimes there's subscriptions for ticketing, and the way your model works, if I'm correct, there's no subscription. It's a revenue share based on the performance. And tell us a little bit about that. So I have no upfront costs. If I sell 0 tickets, that's okay. Yep. But if I sell 10 tickets, then a little bit of a revenue exchange happens between my show and Plauzzable. Yeah,
the majority of the money goes to you, the host. So if you host a comedy event and you charge $10, let's say you sell 1 ticket, you just made $6. So the host gets 60% of the revenue share, and 40% covers all your costs on Plauzzable. So that's it. There's no hidden fees. There's no extra like this plus this tax plus that tax. Nothing. We take care of all of the service charges for the payouts and all of the other things that come into it. We don't add the tax onto your customer. The price is what you say. If you say it's $10, that's what the customer pays, and Plauzzable handles the rest.
Yeah, that's incredible. No subscriptions, and it's just, hey, if I do well, great, I do well. Plauzzable takes a little bit for building this giant tech stack for you. It's a fair trade, and it's a great model to bring in new people to live performing. I love it. So, what does the future look like for Plauzzable? Where are you going from here?
Yeah, great question. Well, we want to continue growing, and we're looking forward to doing so. Obviously, doing exactly what we're doing. We also have some plans to further bridge the gap so that it's not quite a leap for people to go, I'm doing all these things in person, to why would I ever do anything online? So we're working on some features that would bring those people together. That's one of the big things, I think, because when I created this, I'm like, this will never replace in person. That was never my intent. Because some people, that's our question, like, well, I'm not going to, it's an either or. There's kind of like, I'm in this corner or I'm in that corner. It's like, there doesn't need to be a corner. There's this very fragmented industry of comedy, and there's a lot of opportunity. And I think, I had the luxury of being able to move to New York or LA, right? Not many people have that. And yet there's a lot of talented people in rural areas or other countries or places where, they may not have a comedy opportunity for a couple hours drive. So my intent is to, how do we bring more people into the fold? How do we kind of level the playing field? So even though, Sarah, who has a family in Kansas, still has an opportunity to hone her comedy skills and maybe get some shows going and dip her feet in and see where it takes her. More of that kind of vibe. And also people who do a lot of in-person already and are really more well-established, somewhere in their comedy journey. Hey, if you're getting ready to go on the road, why not hop online, make some connections, book some gigs, make some friends so that it's not so, it makes a difference, especially if you're traveling, knowing people in other areas, or maybe you hadn't considered going somewhere and it's on the way. And so there's a lot of people that I've seen meet on Plauzzable, and since then they've traveled to do shows with one another, which is really cool. So there's a lot of opportunity. And I think, I want to bridge that gap between in-person and online and help people make connections within the community.
Yeah, at the beginning of the show, I teased that you and I are on very similar journeys. And I don't know if you know anything about me, but in 2015, I started virtual podcasting. Like, I started a trivia show on a platform called Blab. And Blab was this first 4-in-the-box live stream service. People either know it or they don't. And it's not relevant, but it ended up growing so fast it collapsed under its own weight. It had no business model, no way to make revenue, and it just collapsed. So I spent 7 years with this idea in the back of my head. Well, where's a podcast performed at? Why does it have to just be, online or recorded, privately in my mom's basement or something like that?
Yeah.
Where is a podcast and where are these performing ideas? So I built this thing. I called it Theater in a Car. It was basically a mixer and some speakers that I could fit in the back of a sedan with a podium. And I could set it up anywhere. And I started doing shows like that. I would just take my theater and set it up in the middle of a park or at a coffee shop. But I kept thinking there's something more. And just like you, there's something more to this. There's something here that I don't understand. If you look behind me, I'm going to get out of the way a little bit. I built this theater out of the idea of loving live performances that I could broadcast. And this is where I think you and I may cross paths into the future, where I'm trying to do a performance with an audience in my studio and broadcast it live. So this hybrid type event, and you're building this great platform where it's immersing the virtual audience. So that was kind of the tease at the beginning of the show. Like, we're kind of building very, very similar things, and there's got to be something here that is bigger than the both of us put together. So I hope for people listening who are, just dipping their toes into, for me, I'm more on the podcast side. Leanne's more on the comedy improv side. There's something happening that's bigger than both of us everywhere. We see podcasters, they're starting to fill theaters and arenas, and we're seeing this type of entertainment become more mainstream. So pay attention to Plauzzable. If you reach out to me if you want to talk to me, but this isn't about me. This is about Leanne. What she's doing is so good and so far ahead of where the market is, like on the cutting edge, as far as this ability to do a virtual performance, sell tickets with this DIY mentality that by serving, we're going to produce better shows and reach bigger audiences. And that's the part that caught my attention about your story. And I'm so grateful we've had this time together.
Thanks. Yeah, it's exciting. And I agree. Knowing what you're doing, to your point, there's something bigger happening. Like, I think we can all feel it. There's opportunity that technology brings. And I sometimes think that often as artists, we're like, technology adverse to some degree. But at the same time, I'm like, but you know what? Like, this could really, really help us in a way that hasn't ever been done in the past, So, coming from a place where we don't have to do anything but check our mic, now all of a sudden people have to log in and check their camera and do all these things. But I think it's fascinating. And I think that any way that we can bring the audience in closer to an experience, and as performers, even with you and your podcast, sometimes if you were here by yourself, it's like screaming into the wind, but having, another person do it, having a guest, it fills a void. And I think as a comedian, obviously for me, it does, having even improv shows when I was just starting out, to your question earlier, like, how were they? We had whole improv shows every week at this bar in a basement. And I remember one time one person showed up and everybody's like, we're not doing it. I'm like, there is one person down there who took the time. We're doing a show. Yeah. And, we're going down there and doing a show because that's what we do it for, or that's what I do it for. Other people will be like, I can't do a show for 3 people. I'm like, I have, and I will.
Full transparency, I've had nights where I was on stage and I just locked the front door because nobody was there. So, and I still did the show, because there's a virtual element to it, but I've done shows for 0 people.
Yeah.
So it's those repetitions matter.
And that's just it. Like there was a show we were doing in New York, and the producer of the show were like, we can't get anybody to come in, because you'd have to go stand on the street and bark and get people to come in. Like, we're just not lucking out. And I said, well, I'll go ask these people that just sat down at the bar. And they're like, yeah, we'll be in a few minutes. And then the girl who was going to host didn't host. And I'm like, fine, I'll host. By the time we were done doing the show, when we went up and I started hosting, there was 0 people. By the time we were done with the show, it was a full house, people standing in the back. I'm like, you never know. You just never know. So yeah, every opportunity to perform is, I have to take it. And I love what you're doing, and, giving people a space to make their dream a reality, and then be able to broadcast that live.
Well, thank you. And all of your journey, what's the one big takeaway you can tell us about? Because you've really, you pushed on your own, like that back when you were with the family and doing these skits, and that idea of creating. I come from skateboarding and punk rock. So when I start talking about these things, really the rules that most people follow in the world don't really apply when you start to become creative. And comedy is very similar to skateboarding and punk rock, because you're pushing the boundaries of what you know and what you understand, and you're learning and you're absorbing. And what were some things that, if somebody just getting into this, maybe they were that kid that, did skits under the dining room table by themselves with a flashlight, under a blanket, what would you tell somebody who's maybe on the fence of, should I really do a live show? Do I have what it takes? Can I even do this? Yeah,
I would say I know everybody knows this quote, you always miss 100% of the shots you'll never take. You never take. Wayne Gretzky, right? But I firmly believe in that. And I think that it's really important. Like, most people, I'll try anything once. I'll usually try anything twice. Like, maybe sometimes 10 times, but I think it's like, just because it doesn't work once doesn't mean it won't ever work. And just because like you think you have this feeling like, I know something's there, but what is it? Sometimes we have to experiment to figure out what that is, or to test it. Maybe, we can sense it, maybe not know exactly what it is right away, but put it out there and see what it is. Because I don't know, I always think about, this is longer than like a one takeaway, but the book, The Help, and then it became a big movie. Mm-hmm. And the woman who wrote the book, I think, went to like 30 plus or 60, either 30 or 60, I don't know, I'll have to look it up again, publishers, and got all these notes. And her family, after a while, was like, just stop, you're not going to get published. And she's like, no. And she was like obsessed, and they were like, please stop. So because they were getting frustrated and mad at her, I think it was taking a toll on her whole family life. She said, okay, I quit. And they're like, oh, thank God. And then she was like, I'm going to do a weekend with the girls, and I'm going to go here. And she started living her life, or so they thought. But she really went and rented a hotel room and put herself away, and she kept at it, and she did it. And then finally she got published, and then it became a best-selling movie, right? Like, but it's tenacity. It's truly, you take the shot, and then if you truly believe in it and you have that feeling, be tenacious with it. Don't let go of it. Don't let someone else talk you out of it. And I think that is really, really important, because in comedy, having a thick skin, if you're going to be talked out of something really easily, you're probably not the person for comedy, Yeah.
It just hasn't worked yet. If you really believe in something, if you think something's funny, you're like, I'm going to try this, and it bombs and it bombs and it bombs, and you just haven't figured out how it works yet.
Right.
And so take those swings, take those chances, do those repetitions, and figure it out. It's a giant puzzle, and how all these things go together and fit together. You might not know it at first, but once they go together, it's like, the heavens and earth move for you. Like, wow, everything opens up for you. So, take those swings. Leanne, Plauzzable.com, if people want to connect with you directly or reach out to you and ask you some more questions, what's the best way that they can do that?
The best way is sign in on plauzzable.com. There's a contact me form, and also LinkedIn. I'm the only Leanne Linsky in the world.
Awesome. I'm the only Jeff Revilla in America. There's like 50 Jeff Revillas in the Philippines. I don't know what happened, but I'm not. I don't know. I don't know. I was always told I was Italian.
Uh-oh. 23andMe. 23andMe.
Leanne, thank you so much for joining us. Plauzzable.com. We'll hear that theme song.
She left the boardroom, took the mic. Now she's killing punchlines every night. From New York to her LA shows, she's bringing laughs wherever she goes. Zooming in with a comic plan. She built a stage in virtual land. No cover charge, no drink minimum. Just laughs on tap. Oh, here she comes. It's Leanne Linsky, comedy's tech queen, on my guest tonight with Revilla and
The last line, it was so bad. It's Leanne Linsky, comedy's tech queen, on my guest tonight with Jeff Revilla. End scene is all.
I was wondering what the last word was.
And I'm hearing it. I'm like, nobody's gonna know that says end scene.